Dearly beloveds, we are gathered here today to discuss this book right here, To Gaze Upon Wicked Gods. Hello, welcome back to my channel. I'm Jamila, this is JemilaBeReadin, because I do be reading. I did, in fact, read this book, and I wanted to talk about it. There has been a lot of discourse surrounding this book. So much so that it actually propelled me to read this book. And I have a lot of thoughts, both about the book and the discourse. So many thoughts. I actually filmed 2 separate TikTok videos. Both were about 10 minutes long, and I still felt like that was not enough. So I decided that I was going to make a YouTube video talking about this book and everything that was going on. Let's just get into it. So very briefly, let's talk about what this book is and how it got onto my radar. So To Gaze Upon Wicked Gods is written by debut author Molly X. Chang. This is the first in an adult fantasy series. I don't know how many books it's supposed to be, but it is adult. I will say it is actually being published as young adult in the UK. And personally, for me, it reads more as YA. And now this was a part of the discourse, so we'll get into that a little bit later, but all I'll say for right now is that I do think it reads more YA than adult, but really that's neither here nor there. So this book first got onto my radar because it was actually one of the books. Molly was one of the authors, the group of debut authors that was targeted by Kate Corain during the whole review bombing scandal thing that happened over on Goodreads, I guess earlier this year. I don't know why it feels like this happened so long ago, but I guess it did happen in January. Or maybe it was like late December, I can't remember, but it didn't happen that long ago. So that was initially how this book came onto my radar. A lot of people were promoting the books that were affected. And so I looked at it, I was like, gorgeous cover, beautiful, stunning. I looked at the description briefly and I was like, I'm like not totally into this. I'll kind of just wait and see what other people are saying about this book first before I get into it. And then I also thought it was YA too at the time, and I don't read a lot of YA. I'm like really, particular when it comes to the YA that I choose to pick up these days. So I was like, it was on my mind, but I was like, I'll just kind of wait and see what people are saying about this book. And then I want to say maybe a month later, this book re-entered my mind, because I don't recall if someone shared this with me or I saw it on Twitter, but people were sharing this colonizer romance list that was going around on Goodreads, or that was created on Goodreads, that were a few books that were put on there as colonizer romances. And so I saw that and I was like, interesting. And then I came across 2 really negative reviews about this book on Goodreads when I went on there to look at the list. And then I was like, oh, let me see what people are saying about this book. And I came across these negative reviews and I was like, damn, these are very passionate. These people really do not like this book. It was long. And one thing I'll say, it seems very clear that they did read this book and they just really didn't like it. So I'm saying that, again, this feeds into the discourse. So I saw that and I was like, interesting. I'm actually more interested in picking up this book, not because I like colonizer romances, but I feel like lately there has been people misconstruing problematic elements in a book. What I mean by that is people are labeling an entire book as problematic because it contains problematic content, when that is the point. These things like racism or, homophobia or whatever is in the book because it is being commentated on or something like that, right? I think the most recent example I can think of is the book, I'm forgetting the name of the book actually, but I'll pop up a picture of it. But people that were saying that this book was racist and anti-indigenous, even though like the point of the book was the main character was experiencing these things and like overcoming them, and also like it was commentating on these structures of oppression. And so anyways, I never read that book, so I can't say for certain, but like people whose reviews I trust were like, this is really being misconstrued. And I just feel like I've been seeing a lot more of that, like a lot of people pushing back on being uncomfortable when like that is the point, like it's supposed to deconstruct these things. So I was wondering if maybe the same thing was happening with To Gaze Upon Wicked Gods, and I was like, okay, I want to read this book and kind of see what's going on here. Especially I was like, what is inspiring such passionate negativity towards this book? So at this point I was like, okay, I'm definitely gonna get this book from the library when it comes out, or from Libby. I'm not gonna purchase this book because I don't know if I'm gonna like it, so I'll get it from the library when it comes out and see what's going on. A few weeks later, I come across this tweet of someone who I think is affiliated with the author. I'm not sure. It seems like they may have some sort of friendship or at least acquaintanceship, but this person makes a very passionate defense of this book and how it's not a colonizer romance. Very passionate, long thread, it goes viral. Okay, so I see this and I'm like, this is really interesting. Like, and then I'm seeing other people comment, like also defending this book, and I'm like, okay, this book is inspiring some strong reactions on both sides right now. And I was like, okay, I think I need to read this book immediately. So I see that it's on NetGalley. I request the e-arc. I get approved like an hour later, and I'm like, bet, I'm gonna read this. So I kind of let it languish for a little bit. A couple days later, I'm seeing this discourse really starting to pick up, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna read this right now. I read it over the course of like 5 days, and as I'm reading it, this discourse is really coming to a head. Okay, it's really spread, it really got big. I think the two reviewers who posted negative reviews on Goodreads, I think they like buddy read it together, and they started getting, after that passionate defense, they started getting a lot of hate and potentially have been contacted by the author. There was a lot of things going on. It was a little bit hard for me to follow, and also, to be honest, I don't really want to like rehash all of this discourse, but a lot of things were happening in this week, and a lot of things were happening. The reviewers were getting a lot of hate and a lot of like bad comments, and Molly, the author, also started receiving a lot. I mean, it really blew up outside of like book Twitter into a much larger space. And so she kind of ended up on like this like Chinese nationalist incel manosphere space, and she was receiving a lot of like gross comments. So it really blew up into wild proportions. The discourse really like started to like branch off into other things. It was wild. I have a lot of thoughts about it that I don't really want to get too deeply into to like all of the little discourse things that were happening. Whether or not this should have been like put on a colonizer list, like at the end of the day, like these are reviewers making their own list talking about the book. I do think reviewers should have their own space. I understand maybe feeling some type of way seeing this, but again, I just think it is very important for authors' wellness and mental health to stay away from Goodreads. I just don't think that there's really any benefit for authors being on Goodreads at all. Do you know what I mean? Like, I just don't think it's helpful for anybody. But in any case, I read this book. We're going to talk about whether or not it's a colonizer romance, but let's talk about like what this book actually is. So like I said, it's the first in adult fantasy series, and we're following our main character, Ru Ying. She's, I think, 19 years old. She lives in this country called Pangu, I think. So as I try to explain the plot, it might sound like I'm confused, and that's because I am. And the world building is very bad. And I guess I should say at this point that this is going to be a negative review. It's not, well, I was gonna say it's not gonna be like passionately negative, but we'll see. So, like I said, we have our main character, Ru Ying. She lives in this country called Pangu. And in this world, in this country, we have people who have magical abilities. And we're told that magic is slowly fading away from this world. So only like a handful, like not that many people actually have powers. These powers, I think, are meant to have come from the gods or something like that. It's not really explained. And each person has like different abilities. And Ru Ying is one of these people who has magic. She has death magic. So when she focuses and concentrates and like looks at the person, she can essentially suck their life force out. And she can do this and not kill them, but it kind of like leaves them as a husk of their former selves, or she can go all the way and kill them. And she has grown up really like afraid of her own power for most of her life, and has been told repeatedly by her grandmother, like, you know, don't use this magic, you shouldn't use this magic. Another thing I should mention too is that magic users, to various degrees, the more that they use their power, I guess they will die sooner. Like, I guess it kind of takes up some of their own life force when they use magic. And I'm assuming that it varies depending on the person and what their power is, but I'm not sure. But we do know that with Ru Ying, another aspect of this is that she fears that she is like, the more she uses it, the sooner she will die. And, you know, there was also an incident when she was younger that has really traumatized her in regards to her powers. So she really just doesn't use her power, and she's constantly fighting it back. And we're getting told that she can kind of like see the death god or hear the death god, and it's constantly whispering in her ear, like, use your powers, use your powers. So she's kind of like fighting this desire to use her powers. And I want to say too, here at this point, like, there might be some spoilers, but I will like put up a spoiler card and like let you know right before I do spoil. And so another factor of this world is that it is being colonized. At the beginning of this book, there is an author's note. This author's note talks about how the author was inspired to write this book from the folklore that she heard from her grandfather. And in particular, she also says that she was inspired by Unit 731. If you're not familiar with what Unit 731 is, it is a Japanese military unit during World War II that conducted experiments on the people in China and in particular Manchuria. Horrible, horrible, horrible experiments on people, purely for the sake of science. And I decided to look more into this since it was talked about in the author's note. It is horrifying. It is sickening. I do encourage everyone to go look more into this, especially because, you know, it was swept under the rug, in particular by the United States after World War II. So, but be warned, it is horrible to learn about the things that the Japanese did to the people of Manchuria. So reading that author's note really sets up an expectation for me going into this book, and I imagine would set up an expectation for many people going into this book. So in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, we're talking about Unit 731, we're talking about Chinese folklore, we're talking about colonialism. So I'm thinking going into this, okay, this is going to be a work that is exploring colonialism, is anti-colonialist, is going to have some element related to Unit 731. Let's see what's going on. So coming back to the colonization bit of Pangu, I was thinking, okay, the colonizers are probably going to be like a fantasy version of the Japanese. That is not the case. The colonizers are the Romans. You're thinking ancient Rome? That is a great question that I cannot answer for you right now. Because I don't know if it's supposed to be ancient Rome that never fell. I don't know if this is supposed to be another kind of Rome. I don't know. I don't have any basis. I don't know why the Romans or like a European colonizer would be used in this particular instance, given the inspiration. But I'm like, we move. Let's see what's going on here. We learn pretty quickly, this is a light spoiler, that the Romans are in fact aliens, okay? They came from the sky. It seems like they might be from like a different multiverse, another world, I don't know. And that world seems to be more of a resemblance of our world. They have a lot of science and technology, and really this book is setting up this science versus magic dichotomy. We are constantly being told about the science of the Romans. I mean, for us, in our world, we can recognize what these things are, but it's just really interesting because like anything that comes up, it's like we can never defeat the science of the Romans. Look at us, look at us little. It really feels like it's condescending of the people of Pangu. It just doesn't make any sense to me, because while yes, maybe the Romans have more advanced technology, it's not like there's not inherently science happening in Pangu, right? Because like they have ships too. What is that if not made by science? Unless it's made by magic. I don't know. Those things are not explained to me. As I said previously, magic is fading away in this world. So it doesn't seem like magic is steeped into the society and the societal structure and how this world functions in the same way that science seems to be for the Romans. So it's just weird that we keep having this like science versus magic thing. It's just weird. In any case, we also have this added element of the Romans basically feeding opium in this world called opium, but it's basically opium, into Pangu and its people, and it's causing a lot of destruction, and a lot of people are getting addicted to it. Ruiying's own sister is struggling with addiction to it. Her father died from it. So it's like this whole thing. So at a certain point, we're gonna skip forward. Ruiying gets kidnapped by the Romans, and she's like forced to show her powers. And then there are three princes. God, this is there are three princes, okay? One who is in Rome land with the grandfather who's the king. We have another two are here in Pangu. One is Valentine, and he's like evil, like super aggressive. And then we have Prince Antony, who is more like low-key, very into science. Like he's like a researcher. He's like the cool, calm, collected manipulator type. And through circumstances, Ruiying ends up working for Prince Antony. Another thing I should mention is that we have the Phantom and his group. The Phantom is a rebel. A rebel. I don't know if the Phantom is one person and he has his rebel group, or if the Phantom is the name of the rebel group, but they're rebelling against the Romans, okay? And Ruiying is constantly talking down about this rebel group. She's like, I just like doesn't understand like why they're doing this. She thinks it's futile. Her sister's like really down with the cause, and she's like, no, you can't. So it's weird, especially because her sister's like girly pop, you have like this strong ability, like this ability can be used with the rebel group to like take down the Romans. And she's like, no, like I just want peace, like I just want peace, like I can't use my powers. And she's also talking about how like she's like, I could die if I overuse my powers. And okay, so when she gets kidnapped by the Romans, I don't want to say she has agency in this decision, like complete agency, because she is kidnapped. There is an extreme power imbalance, and her family's lives, her friends' lives are kind of like vaguely being threatened if she doesn't work with Prince Antony. He's like, I want you to kill for me. I want you to target certain people. I want you to be my like assassin. So I don't want to say that she has like complete agency over the decision that she makes to work for him. But I just like don't know how to explain this if you haven't read it. But also there are some people who have read it and like did not see it the same way as me. So, okay. Her internal dialogue so quickly, she very quickly folds into believing that Prince Antony is a good guy. There isn't much resistance. Obviously, she's concerned with the safety of not only her own self, but that of her friends and family. But she very easily believes that he wants to be allies and that he wants peace for both of their people. He tells her this, like, yes, like, I have you here, but I want to be allies. Like, I really just, like, want the best for both of our people. Like, I want peace. I want us to come together. And she believes this so quickly. And I think maybe I understand the author's intent, or maybe I am reading intent where there wasn't any. I don't know. But I think in particular with the relationship between Ruing and Prince Antony, she's trying to show this, like, that he's like manipulating her. But the problem is the execution. In the writing, quite frankly, is bad. That's one of the biggest things throughout this. Like, it is a slog to get through. It is so overly written. It is overly metaphorical and overly flowery. I think it's like really trying to be like this very like lush, flowery prose that feels very like mystical and like reminiscent of like fairy tales and folklore, but it does it so much so that it actually like begins to not make a lot of sense. Like even some of the metaphors, you're reading it and you're like, what does this even mean? That it becomes nonsensical, and this is just constantly happening. So it's like really a slog to get through, and there's just not enough done to show like even like a slow building trust of Prince Antony, or something to show that, oh, maybe he's not as bad as she expected, even if he does end up being as bad as she expected later on. We'll get to that. There's just nothing there to show like why she suddenly trusts him, especially because throughout the first part of this book leading up to this interaction, she is constantly beating us over the head with the fact that the Romans are bad. They're bad, they're bad, they're bad, they're evil, evil, evil. I hate them, I hate them, I hate them. Like constantly repeating that to us. So when you have that and then suddenly she's just like, I took his warm hand and I decided I'm gonna be his killer. Also, didn't you say you didn't want to use your powers because you were afraid of dying? You didn't want to use your powers for the rebel group, but you so easily fold for this man with jade eyes. The amount of times we are told about Prince Antony's beautiful jade eyes. I wanted to gouge my own eyes out, quite frankly. His jade eyes. There's nothing else. Clearly, they had some sort of hypnotizing power that made her fold so easily. It's just Okay. So she folds easily. And then, worst of all, we get a time skip, a 6-month time skip. We skip 6 months forward. She's been working for him and assassinating for him for 6 months, and we did not get to see that. We come back in 6 months later, and it's clear some sort of relationship has developed between Ru Ying and Prince Antony that we were not privy to watching, I guess. And suddenly she's just like, low-key, like, we're friends, and also, like, maybe I kind of like him a little bit, and also I think he loves me too. And so, like, warning bells are happening for me at this point. I'm like, this sounds like a colonizer romance. I don't know. And I knew that a twist was going to happen. Like, I was just waiting for it because of the Unit 731 situation that we're told about in the author's note. So I'm like, clearly we're going to find out that the Romans are experimenting on the people of Pangu and Prince Antony is probably involved. So I'm just like waiting. I know there's going to be a twist. But meanwhile, like, okay. In any case, she does this. We can skip all of that. They have a moment at one point where they're traveling together and there's like a one bed trope. And I'm like, bro, what story are we in right now? Like, this is a colonizer. Death is happening all around you. This is not good. So we have that, and then we get like a brief, quick chapter from Antony's perspective, which it's so funny because throughout this book, his name is spelled Antony, Antony. But then when we get his perspective and the chapter has his name, it's Athony. And I was like, you can't even spell homeboy's name right in his own chapter. Anyways, that's not a big deal. But we get it, and he's like, I'm so in love with her, and I love her so much. And I'm like, do you? Why? We didn't see anything of your relationship develop. Like, at least if this is gonna be like a he manipulated me, and by the end we're no longer together, like, at least show us like the development of this. So we get to the end. We're getting to the end, and I'm gonna spoil. Ru Ying has a friend named Baihu. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. He's a childhood friend and a childhood crush. And she thinks that he is a traitor. That's another funny thing. That could have been like a really interesting like dynamic to explore, but it doesn't get explored. She thinks that he's a traitor throughout most of this book, because he has like sells opium to people. Like, he kind of works with the Romans. He's kind of like forsaken his own people. And so she, like, even in her own internal dialogue is like calling him a traitor. She's like, I can't believe he's working with the Romans. And then she turns around and does like even more heinous shit for them. In any case, she finds out that he is actually like a spy for the Phantom. He's gotten into like kind of a higher trusted position with the Romans so that he can spy for the Phantom. And he like sees her working for them, and he's like, girly pop, like, come on, let's go to the Phantom, let's go work with him. And she's like, no, Prince Antony wants peace. Actually, he wants peace. Let's put a pin on that peace bit, we'll come back to that. And then at the end, he's like, my good sis, they're experimenting on our people, and Prince Antony is in charge of all of this. He's in charge of these experiments. And she's like, I don't believe you, actually. You can fuck off. I'm paraphrasing. And he's like, no, let me show you. So he goes and shows her that they're experimenting, and it turns out one of the people that they're experimenting on that she witnesses is another one of her friends that had been previously captured. And one of her conditions for working with Prince Antony is that she would get released and like not be bothered. It turns out he never actually did that, and in fact they've been testing on her this whole time. So she witnesses them test on her, and she ends up dying, and she witnesses all of this, which I think having a friend be the person that she witnesses was a bad move, because up until this point Ru Ying is kind of like, I don't give a fuck about the people that I'm killing. Like, she really clearly sees them like as strangers. She's like, she does like like is grappling with some guilt about like what she's doing, but ultimately she doesn't really spend a lot of time thinking about it. And so I think it really would have been more impactful if she saw like another stranger being experimented on and was like, holy shit, like what have I been doing? What is this? Like, I can't believe, like, these are my people. But having her friend be the one that she witnesses, like, I feel like takes away from that emotional impact, because obviously she's going to be upset that her friend is like dead. Do you know what I mean? And then we see that when she confronts Anthony about this, she's really stuck on the fact that he lied to her about releasing her friend, and not so much about the fact that people are being experimented on. Like, she keeps talking about her friend and like how you lied to me, rather than, bro, what you're doing is actually sickening, disgusting, you're a piece of shit. Which maybe she's gonna come to that conclusion later, but like, that's just like not what we're seeing. Like, maybe that's what she's thinking, but like, that's not the way that it was written. Do you know what I mean? And so ultimately she confronts him. She's still working with him at the end of this. She's like, convinces him that whatever, I get it. But in her mind, she's just like, I'm going to take him down. Like, I'm going to take them down. And then that's how the book ends. Okay. One could say that this is not a colonizer romance because she doesn't actually end up with Anthony at the end of this. Like, it's clear that she is deeply upset about the things that he's doing. And even though she's pretending to continue to work with him at the end of this book, like, she wants to kill him. She wants to take him down. So part of this discourse that happened was Molly ended up revealing earlier than she wanted the title of the second book to show that it wasn't a colonizer romance. It's called To Kill a Monstrous Prince, which I'm just like kind of wondering, had this discourse not gone down, like what actually was the original plan for this relationship. I'm not gonna lie, I do feel like all of this discourse is maybe going to alter some of the author's plans. Like, I don't know that I completely buy that they were not, that this wasn't going to end up being a relationship. Mainly because there are multiple princes, so To Kill a Monstrous Prince could be 2 other people. But I don't know, I just like, something could happen in the second book where like he gets redeemed and they end up together. Do you know what I mean? Like, I there was like no guarantee in my mind at the end of this that she was gonna kill him and be against him. I don't know if that makes any sense. Hello, I am editing this video right now, and I feel like I'm struggling to explain what I mean here. Specifically because, and this is, I guess, more light spoilers, at the end of this book, as she is grappling with what she has just discovered, and she's deciding that she's gonna go ahead and join the Phantom and try to take down the prince, there's still a part of her, like, we're still getting this internal battle where she's like, I still love him, or even now I still want to go to him. Particularly at the end when she is confronting him and there is this conversation that's happening between them. There is a part that you could say feels like it was put in there to be sympathetic. He's explaining his reasonings for why they're testing on the people of Pangu, and in particular the magic users. So it almost feels like it's not being justified, but lending a sympathetic air to him that I feel like might allow him to be redeemed in future books. I don't know. I also want to talk about how this book was being marketed by the author. This was being marketed as a enemies to lovers, slow burn villain romance. It was also being marketed as perfect for Raylo shippers and also Zutara shippers. So when I see these things, enemies to lovers, slow burn villain romance, there was also everyone is morally gray. I think we've lost the definition of morally gray, but I digress. And perfect for Zutara and Reylo shippers. Like, I'm not a Star Wars person. I've seen like one movie. I don't know anything about. I do know things about Reylo, but I have not personally watched the Star Wars stuff. I know a lot about Zutara, okay? As an Avatar fan. I feel indifferent towards Zutara as a ship, but when I hear Zutara, I'm like, what is that if not a colonizer romance? Like, even though Zuko redeems himself, and clearly, like, all of the shippers, and, like, all of the fics and stuff, like, are post, like, end of Avatar, do you know what I mean? That kind of, like, makes sense to me. But, like, what is that if not a colonizer romance? What do you mean by enemies to, like, why are you marketing this as enemies to lovers? Why are you marketing this as a slow burn villain romance? Like, those things are going to imply to me that Rui and Antony are endgame. So when you have that as the marketing, I just, I don't know what to expect. Do you know what I mean? I guess we'll find out in the second book if I can even get myself to read that, to be honest. I think maybe it's perhaps a bit of an oversimplification to say that it is a colonizer romance, but the writing was poorly done. And I mean, even if you were to take this as an enemies to romance situation where they're supposed to end up together, like, it's also poor, like, the romantic elements, like the relationship building is poorly done. We have a time skip where all of the bonding that we could have seen that would have happened is not there. Even if you want to say that she was being slowly manipulated by him, we are not witnessing that. That is not on page. We are just being told at the end that he manipulated her, but we're not seeing any of this. All I'm seeing is someone who folds very quickly because of a man with beautiful green jade eyes. I'm not being shown this slow, manipulative person taking advantage of her. I'm seeing someone who is almost excited to work for him, who is excited to use her powers, who doesn't really care about fighting for her. She keeps hammering on about how he wants peace, and I like his vision for peace because I want peace. But peace, this idea of peace, is just living quietly under oppression, under subjugation. And again, like, maybe that's the point. Like, she is so clearly deluded, and then she's gonna, like, realize and come out of it and be like, okay, this is wrong. I was wrong. I've misunderstood this situation. I understand how peace under these circumstances is not actually peace. But again, that's not what's happening either. So much of the end of this, because especially the reveal happens like 93% of the way through, it feels like she's upset that he lied to her, not fundamentally upset at what he's doing or what he represents. I think I understand what Molly was trying to go for, but I just think the execution was so poorly done. And like I said, the writing was really not good. Hello again. I forgot to talk about this earlier in the video, and I wasn't sure where to fit it in at this point, so I guess now is good a time as any. Another thing about the poor writing that I wanted to talk about was this lack of place. You don't really get a good sense of Pengu or any of these places. And just like, I'm talking like a physical sense of place either. It just feels very fanficky, actually, in the way that it feels like a lot of like random scenes that were just like put together, which makes sense in the context of fan fiction, but doesn't work in the context of like an actual novel. It just feels like a lot of random scenes collected together. There's a lot of like description in this book, again, because I talk about how it's overly written, overly flowery. There's a lot of description, and yet I still feel like I don't have a good sense of like what things are looking like, what this place feels like. And these side characters, like her friends, her grandmother, her sister, are pretty much, they feel like NPCs. They're barely in this book. So really the only character we have is Ru Ying and Antony. All the other side characters feel very like not fleshed out. It doesn't feel like they're really contributing to the story. It doesn't add, again, to this sense of place. Another piece to this, I know I said I'll come back to it, and then I never did. So I'll get back to it now, regarding its age categorization. Like I said, it feels YA. It reads like YA to me. And I know there's a lot of people who feel like a lot of books written by women automatically get funneled into YA, whether or not it actually is. And I typically agree with that sentiment. But I just don't feel like that's the case with this book, because I feel like this book doesn't know what it wants to be tonally, again, because it's like both trying to be enemies to lovers and also talking about colonization. It's just really weird to me. This book feels dark, but is not really that dark. And I just feel like I would expect an adult book to go a little further than it did. Like, this doesn't need to be grimdark. It doesn't need to be really gruesome. It's not what I'm asking for. But I just feel like it could have gotten a little deeper. It could have explained a little bit more, even in terms of the experiments. Like, to be honest, I don't know that I fully understand what was happening with the experiments. It really danced over that, glossed over that fact. And again, not that I'm saying that it needed to be like overly gruesome, but I think, talking about it a little more, and then just kind of, like I said, setting up a world that feels like lived in, that feels dark, where you're like witnessing some of... And another thing, sorry, I'm just thinking about this right now. This book is the epitome of tell, not show. I know there are times where you need to tell, I understand. But this was egregiously just telling us things constantly. Like, it's also overly repetitive. I just feel like if this was going to feel impactful or like feel like it was a lived in world, show us. Like, don't just tell us this is bad. Don't just tell us these colonizers are bad. Don't tell us that this world that you're living in is dark. Don't just tell us that. Show us that. There's even like a few chapters that are flashbacks, and it doesn't even feel like we're in it with her. And this is written in first person. Typically, when you're reading first person, you're meant to be like more immersed into the story because it's like I. But it still feels so disconnected, even when it's like a flashback chapter. It's still like being like told to us. There's just like moments here where it would have benefited for like sitting in the scene a little bit longer, like really giving us like what's happening around you, the physical descriptions, like what are people looking like, what do people smell like. Just give us something. Like, even in the arc, like, I understand it's an arc, some changes are going to be made before the final copy is released, but I would have expected, at least at this point, that grammatical errors would have been like fixed up. There's a lot of grammatical errors. There's a lot of like inconsistencies in the arc. So there's that. It's not the biggest of deals, but it does contribute to all of this. The world building is just so bad. It is not good. And I don't know. I think this is one of the cases where I can maybe understand what the intent was, but the execution wasn't there. And it was done badly enough that it accidentally does the opposite of what you're intending to do. I feel like that's what the situation is. People who are claiming that this is a colonizer romance, I don't know that they are necessarily wrong to do so. Just like based on the material that we're given. In any case, I did give this book 1 star. It is probably going to be on my worst books of the year at the end of the year. I don't wish any like ill will towards the author at all. Like, I'm sure dealing with all of this as your book is going to debut in like a month is extremely stressful. And I think all of the like really disgusting hate comments that she received is totally unwarranted. And I guess I don't really discourage anyone from reading this book. Like, I think if you are interested in reading it, you should go pick it up. You should go see for yourselves what you think of this book. But these were my very long-winded thoughts that I've spoken on for over 40 minutes. So I hope you stuck around. If you happen to have read an early copy of this, I'd love to know your thoughts. And I'll catch y'all in the next one.